Okay, so a couple things. I guess next week we're not having class. We'll be doing a missions conference thing. So, but right now I'm going to tell you guys to go ahead and remember to order your copy. You don't need to have it, but we will be going through it, and I think it'll be helpful. And we're going to do a different format than normal. I'm going to try something new with this. Not saying this is going to be something that we do regularly, but I think with this book it'll be helpful. We're going to do like a small group kind of fashion. So we'll be setting up the room to be a circle. And we will walk through the book, and we'll talk about it, and we'll go through some of those things. Normally I'm not that way, but I feel like the way this book is designed, it's meant for that purpose.
Will there be name tags available?
No. No name tags. But yeah, so Testimonies to the Truth, this is going to be showing how you can defend the Gospels and how you can know that they're historically reliable by only using the Gospels and some external sources, but mostly the Gospels. So it'll be, because you know how when people, we talked a little bit last night, Allison and Chris and I were all talking about people who appeal to the Bible as the authority without proving the Bible. Like, well, the Bible is true. Why? Because it says it is. But so does the Quran. So does the Book of Mormon. So how do you do that? So this is going to show you how you can properly appeal to the Bible in a way that's actually helpful. So we'll do that. Okay. So otherwise, so go ahead and reserve your copy. Go ahead and get one. Testimonies to the Truth by Lydia McGrew. It's like $15, and also
9% off on Amazon right now.
What?
They're 9% off.
They're 9%.
9%.
Yeah.
Dude, you save like $1.50. That's sweet. Then with that, also of course, leave her a 5-star review because she's 1, a Christian, 2, a great philosopher, 3, she's a Michigander, and we got to support one another. All right, today I'm hoping to wrap up our series on the doctrine of hell. Now, up to this, I will do some review. Actually, I'll do a review at the end. So how many of you guys have been following along with this series pretty well on the comparison between the two views? Okay, so today we're going to go, I'm going to try to wrap it up, but then I'm going to try to review the important passages for this discussion. Last time we met, I almost stepped in it by proposing that Luke 16 with the rich man and Lazarus is probably a parable, not an actual story. So that was fun. Most times people have like a complete conniption when you bring that up. But do you guys remember we talked about how one, it was in a line of a series of parables Jesus was talking about?
Yes,
and
we're
then
talking about that possibility.
Right. So, and then also in Matthew 13:46, we see that Jesus communicated in parables, but we also saw that the same parable existed within Jewish writings, so along with a lot of Jesus' other parables. So most likely, there is a very strong case that it is probably a parable. It is a possibility, of course, that there's always a literal story, but I'm of the opinion that it's probably a parable. And most people affirm such a thing. So that's the general consensus anymore. So anyway, now what I wanted to do today is kind of just go over questions regarding hell today. Some questions that I have 10 basic questions that you need to ask yourself when you're thinking about hell and how the doctrine relates to reality. Okay? Because Isaiah 1:18 says this: "Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord." So the question I have is, does your view of hell fit the bill to reason? Is it reasonable, right? So C.S. Lewis says, who, by the way, I'm sure you're familiar with him, but he says, "There is no doctrine I would more willingly remove from Christianity than hell, if it lay in my power. We are told that it is a detestable doctrine, and indeed I too detest it from the bottom of my heart." So C.S. Lewis even recognized the issue that many have had with the doctrine concerning hell. I think that the doctrine of hell is something that Christians are the most uncomfortable with, because even though we say we love God, and He's a loving God, a merciful God, there's also this reality of a judgment. And many of us, I think all of us would be like, well, we're probably not universalists, but we'd hope that universalism is true to a degree, right? That everyone gets to enter into the presence of God. So some who view eternal conscious torment promote what I believe to be an unbiblical view, though. So eternal conscious torment can take us to such an extreme on why it's okay to eternally torture people that you'll have people like Samuel Hopkins who says this. Brace yourselves. Their torment shall ascend up into the sight of the blessed forever, and serve as a clear glass always before their eyes to give them a constant, bright, and most affecting view. This display, so that he's talking about that hell being present in those in heaven. Okay, you can see it in this guy's view. This display of the divine character and glory will be in favor of the redeemed and most entertaining, and give the highest pleasure to those who love God, and raise their happiness to ineffable heights. Should this eternal punishment and their fire be extinguished, it would be in great measure obscure that the light of heaven, and put an end to the great part of happiness and glory of the blessed. Basically what he's saying is that he believes that in heaven, not only will we be able to see hell, but that we'll be pleased and most entertained by watching people suffer in hell. If that does not give you like really bad vibes, it should.
So we become heartless sociopaths in heaven?
Apparently. I'm like, is that any better than the Romans in the Colosseum, right? Like watching people get torn apart by lions? Like, how does that make you any better? Like, and this is what I mean when you have to be careful about pagan ideas and worldly ideas entering into your Christianity, because these things can get twisted and demented. Luckily, we do have people like Max Lucado. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the name Max Lucado, but Max Lucado, who believes in eternal conscious torment, he says this: I'll celebrate my misreading of his words on the last day. So in other words, he goes, look, if it's destruction and I'm wrong, I'll be happy about that, which I think is very good. Hello, Sarah.
Hello. Random.
Yeah, you're good. So we see that, Samuel Hopkins is celebrating people burning in hell forever and ever, saying it should bring us happiness, which is messed up. And Max Lucado being like, I would be gladly wrong on this topic, right? So anyway, so here's some questions I want you guys to ask concerning hell. I don't have this up on the PowerPoint. I didn't get a chance to do it this week. Honestly, I actually forgot, so I did have chances to do it. Anyway, so first question. How, in your view, and these are questions that you don't have to answer, but if you want to mingle and talk about it, that's fine. But how is hell justice on your view? Something we should ask ourselves. In my view of hell, how is it justice? Eternal conscious torment would say something to the along of the lines of, because you sinned against an eternal God, you deserve eternal pain. And eternal conscious torment would say that the conditionalist or the annihilationist is wrong because it lets sinners off the hook without any real punishment. Now, of course, I think we thoroughly debunk that view, because I'll ask the question again, because this is my favorite question to ask when people are like, well, if they're destroyed by burning into ash, then there's no real punishment. But let me ask you this. How many of you guys know you're going to heaven? Yes. Many of you guys know you're going to heaven. However, are you guys totally down with being burned alive right now? No. And you already know where you're going, and you're not cool with it. Let alone your final resting place, so to speak. So I think that is a very weak accusation against eternal conscious torment, because no one likes the idea of being burned alive to death, right? So, how is justice in the conditional immortality view or the annihilationist view would be that you inherit the second death. You receive capital punishment for your crimes. So they would say that eternal conscious torment is wrong because we worship a God who says an eye for an eye, but then turns around and tortures people for eternity. So you see what they're saying, that you see where that appeal, and that's what I agree with it, by the way. I think I already told you guys I'm an annihilationist at this point. So it's one of those things. Yes?
Just thinking on that whole topic, even looking at our own justice system, we frown upon cruel and unusual punishment and torture, but the highest degree of justice is capital punishment. Right. And it's not something that's taken lightly.
Exactly. And that goes into what's your view of God, because some people believe, remember we've talked about, can God do that which is contradictory and still be God? We've talked about that before. So can God say it's wrong for you to torture people and you need to put them to death, but I can torture people and I won't put them to death? Is God able to do that? I don't believe he can, because I believe that God can't contradict. But other people believe in what's like called nominalism and even voluntarism, and they would say that God can. So the other question to ask yourself is, and this is an intense question, but how do babies fit in your doctrine of hell? That's another good question. Just in general, it's not necessarily saying that babies go to hell, but how do babies fit into your theology of hell? You know, if you're Martin Luther, you believe that they had to be baptized in order to be spared hell. If you're John Calvin, you believe that God chooses some, chooses others. He elects some don't. And then there's other people who have a really weird contradictory view. Brian, that you're familiar with those, that, well, children are born guilty of sin, they're born sinful, but somehow they're not held accountable to that sin. There's this weird age of accountability, even though technically if you're born guilty of sin, you would deserve hell by definition. Sinners deserve hell, that's how it works. So, what?
If you didn't know the law, I mean.
But that would be my view, right? Because they say that doesn't matter, that you're born that way anyway. Because whether or not you know the law doesn't matter, because you're still born sinful and guilty and entrenched in that. So,
Okay.
But then if they're born in sin and
I don't think that's biblical.
I agree. But that's the problem. It's like if they don't know the law, where there's no law, there is no harm. Like there's no accountability to it, right? I agree, which is why children are born innocent, and then they have to make a decision. And then that they'll be judged by how they respond to what they do know, is what I believe the Bible teaches. I agree. So that's good. Cal, I know you're a smart guy. That or just like people who agree with me. Then I wrote this up here because I wanted to try to. So, being part of the church like denomination we are, I hear regularly people in this denomination and others like it, but we take a literal view. Right? How many of you guys have heard that? Well, we take a literal reading of Scripture. Here's the problem with sometimes saying that. Now, it's not always bad. Literal should always mean... sorry, online audience. All right. Literal should always mean you're taking the language within its proper context. Culturally, historically, you get the idea. So a literal hermeneutic isn't reading it literally, because otherwise there's a giant dragon at the end of Revelation and things get weird. Okay? So you don't want to take it literally. You want to take it literally within its proper context. Make sense? That's like if I was like, well, man, trying to find my daughter's toy that she dropped down the couch was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. You'd be like, there's a needle in a haystack? You know, that's when we're taking figures of speech and we're literalizing them, it becomes a problem.
Yeah, try reading Daniel literally in that.
Exactly. Daniel would
Or
be...
Ezekiel, for that matter.
Yeah, there's a wheel, you know? Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. All right, there's a whole song about it. So the question is, when it comes to the language of hell, which part is literal and which part is figurative? Because we see these words used: death, destruction, second death, consumed, even reduced to ash, and all these other ones, right? Then we also see eternal fire, smoke rising forever and ever, worms that never die. So which one's figurative and which one's literal? So when someone's like, well, I take a literal view of hell, I'm always just like, no, you don't. None of us do. We all have to figuratize something. So if you believe in eternal conscious torment, you don't believe that they're actually dead. You believe they're alive being tormented. They're not really dead. You don't believe they're actually destroyed. You just believe they're in a continual process of destruction. You don't believe that there's technically a second death because you're actually alive. And you don't believe that you're actually fully consumed. You just believe the fire laughs at you forever and ever. Now, if you're an eternal conscious torment person, you go, no, I just take it. No, you're an annihilationist. You go, no, I take it literally. Well, no, you don't, because you don't believe that the fire burns forever and ever. You don't believe the smoke rises forever and ever. You don't believe that worms exist there that never die. So no matter what, something is figurative. Something is literal. Does that make sense? The question is, which one is it? That's the question we're getting at. So, well, now I'm just knocking things around. So that is a question that you need to ask yourself, is which part are you taking literally and which part are you taking figuratively? This is why I thought our last lesson, I shared some things that destroyed my view when I was in eternal conscious torment, which was because we see eternal fire, smoke rising forever, and worms that never die used in the Old Testament to describe actual events of destruction, right? So it's like, well, and then we see this terminology here is very straightforward, right? Like, okay, but if we're seeing that used figuratively in a literal sense in the Old Testament, then in my mind it makes more sense that's why I'm an annihilationist now. It's like that seems to have a stronger case biblically speaking, in its usage, that there is the more figurative language than that. Does that make sense? Otherwise, what we're doing is we're kind of reading New Testament understandings into the Old Testament, and I believe that the Old Testament points to the New. It's not, sometimes we get that backwards. So, does that make sense? That's where my mind is. So, which part is figurative? So again, eternal conscious torment would say that death, destruction, second death, to perish is all figurative. And on eternal conscious torment, they view that they are not really destroyed. But and the annihilationists would say the unquenchable fire and smoke rising forever and ever is figurative. So on the annihilationist view, they aren't really burning in eternal fire. So in my estimation, again, of the biblical data, I think annihilationism is true, but that's my opinion. So, and I'm not saying that everyone should agree with me, nor am I saying that you should just abandon what you've been taught your entire life and just go, well, Will said it, so it's fine. No. Be a Berean, go look at it, go study it for yourself, okay? And then let me know when you eventually agree with me. Just kidding, okay. Oh, that was right there, low-hanging fruit. Okay. How does immortality fit into your theology? That is a good question on hell. So in eternal conscious torment, both the saved and the unsaved are technically immortal. One just lives in bliss and the other one lives in torture. Okay? However, in conditional immortality, or annihilationism, we would say that we gain immortality only through believing in Jesus Christ. Which, again, not to just keep sounding like I'm super biased at the end of my own series, but whatever, guys, deal with it. But again, I think the biblical data shows that those who are going to live forever, for sure, are only those who believe. And it seems like he keeps talking about death, destruction, and there might be a moment of time that they are in torment. That's about as much as the biblical data really shows. Another good question to ask yourself: how does the Old Testament language fit into your theology? Remember, it's on that Old Testament language over here. So this is what eternal conscious torment people will say, and which is what I used to say: progressive revelation. Over time, God progressively reveals more and more truth until we get to the New Testament, and now we see the full picture. Okay? He was using destructive language in the Old Testament with the prophets, and then over here, now we're getting more tormenty language. However, the annihilationists would say it never changed between the Old and the New, because the Old Testament and the New Testament both use the same figurative language at the same figurative spots, and still uses the same literal language in the same literal spots. So the annihilationists would just say, they just deny it. Does that make sense? They deny the premise. But the eternal conscious torment would appeal to progressive revelation, which is why in the ancient texts everyone believed in annihilation, and then later on in church history people believed in eternal conscious torment. But remember, guys, eternal conscious torment was popularized by who? Augustine. You'll notice that's a running theme in here. There's a reason why when I was the more and more studied theology, I just now describe myself as pre-Augustinian. Because I realized that Augustine, not only did he influence the church a lot, but he's the one who introduced a lot of new concepts that didn't really weren't as popular or didn't exist at all before. Jesus paid. This is the other one. Good question to ask yourself. Jesus paid humanity's debt, correct? Right? We all agree that Jesus Christ died for mankind. But through what? Well, the biblical answer is death. He died, right? So eternal conscious torment would say that he died to shield us from the second death. But annihilationism would say that he died because that's simply what the debt was, which is what we were going to do, which was die and then be eternally destroyed. So instead, he died and rose again to destroy death over man. And they would still say that he destroyed death over man, but he does it to shield them from the second death, whereas this would be he conquered it for you. There's a slight deviation there that the emphasis would be slightly different. Now, I'm not saying that one wouldn't deny one or the other, but just saying that emphasis is going to be different in the annihilationist view. Or at least it's going to be more consistent with a particular view that it emphasizes stronger there, I gotta say. So, anyhow. The other one is, how does Revelation 21:4 fit into your theology? Now you guys might be going, what's Revelation 21:4? But this is why I drew the chart underneath here. So at the end of your Bibles, in Revelation 21, there's this very popular verse, you're probably familiar. So remember, we see the New Jerusalem that comes down. We see the tree of life restored. We see a new Eden, right? Heaven meets earth. Everything's restored in its beautiful harmony. And verse 4 says, He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. So, if there's this new creation where there's no more mourning, no more crying, no more tears, then how can we justify, in my mind, that hell is existing, keeping people mourning and crying and burning forever and ever?
That's the old creation.
So, yeah. So it's the old creation, man. And this was something I had a hard time, because it's like, okay, well, we're saying that everyone's living in perpetual harmony, that God restored order and got rid of all pain and evil and suffering. Then we're still saying, well, but evil people still exist forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And they're just burning and torture and all that. So, it doesn't seem to fit the picture, if that makes sense. Are you picking up? Now, I don't get me wrong, I understand what eternal conscious torment says, because I used to say the same thing, which is, heaven, it's talking about those in heaven, right? That's just that category. Oh no, it's just only talking about those in the restored creation, not those in hell. But that has to be that concept has to be kind of shoehorned into the text a little bit, as opposed to, and they were thrown into the lake of fire. Well, what happens in the lake of fire? Everyone is consumed and destroyed. So it just seems, in my mind, if we're living forever and ever and God wipes away every tear, then hell doesn't exist in perpetual torture. Okay, does that make sense? Am I making sense on my logic here? That one messed me up when I was first researching this. Okay. Because the whole point of the Bible is that he starts off, God is with man in the garden, present, everything's paradise and beautiful. Mankind falls. And throughout the rest of it, he is walking with man, redeeming man, he saves mankind, and then he restores that Edenic state, that Eden, again. Okay? And then he brings heaven down to earth again. So it's like the book stamps there, the book ends. That is a question that I think is a good question. So again, eternal conscious torment would just say that there's no death for unbelievers. But annihilationists would just be like, well, there's no more death at all. They will all be destroyed, and then and everything else exists forever in perfect harmony. Another question to ask yourself is, how does Jeremiah 7:30-33 fit into your theology? I shall read it. But if you guys want to, you can also pull that up. Jeremiah 7, verse 30. So, for the sons of Judah have done evil in my sight, declares the Lord. They have set their detestable things in the house that is called my name, to defile it. And they have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom. Now, what is the valley of Hinnom? That's Gehenna. That is what Christ refers to as Gehenna, okay? The valley of Hinnom. To burn their sons and daughters in the fire, which I do not command. I almost said, which I do not recommend. I almost read that wrong. Would have been really funny. Anyway.
Don't recommend that. Bad time.
Bad time. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. All right. So, which in the valley of the son of Hinnom, which is Gehenna, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I do not command, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no more be Topheth. Now, get this. The days are coming where it will no longer be called Topheth or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth, because there is no room elsewhere. And the dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and none of them will frighten them away. So if he's talking about the valley of Hinnom, which is what Christ refers to as Gehenna, and he's talking about one burning people to death and destruction, but he says there one day it will not be known as that, it'll just be known as the valley of slaughter. Again, seems to be a strong indication that Gehenna, the place that everyone goes to, the wicked, is the valley of slaughter. See, dude, I'm telling you, when you get into this, it messes you up. And when you get rid of the preconceived notions, and you're like, how many of you guys have ever actually done this before in your own theology? I'm going to step aside. How many of you guys have ever done that when you're like, oh, I believe this, I believe this, I believe this, and then you study it out and you feel the ground fall from beneath you? Totally done that, and that's a moment, right? That's a moment of like, I think I'm wrong. Oh my! And then if you're like me, you become obsessive on studying it because you have to know it from every angle because you feel like you've been deceived for 30 years and you have to know it. I don't have a problem, you have a problem. Also, what about the nature of the fires of hell described as consume? What is your view of consume? Okay, so eternal conscious torment would say it's simply the fires that lap at the person in hell forever and ever, consuming them. But annihilationists would be simple. It literally consumes them, reducing them to ash. Okay, Hebrews 10 says this. For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. Leviticus 10 says, Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each led his censer and put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Now, let's fast forward to Revelation. Okay, so we're in Leviticus. Now let's go all the way to the end in Revelation, in chapter 18. For this reason, her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. For mighty is the Lord who has judged her, and the kings of earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her, and they will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. So if we're having, this seems to be more figurative consumption language. Does that make sense? So ECT, eternal conscious torment, would say, as the fire laps at the person in hell, it consumes them. But here it seems to be an idea of the smoke of her burning. These things will be destroyed. Because remember, it says that those who receive the mark of the beast will be in the presence of God, essentially, and angels, and the smoke of their torment will go up forever and ever. And people think, well, there you go, they're tortured. But that's before the lake of fire is brought up. So it's almost like there's this moment of judgment of consumption and then cast aside. Does that make sense? Like you're burned up. And I think that's also what Paul's getting at when it's like saying that all our filthy deeds will be burned up. And then you walk forth pure as gold, right? There's this idea of sin is judged and burned up. And if you never believed in Christ, you don't have any fire insurance. So you're burned up. That seems to be the language. And it's weird because once you see it, it's actually really hard to unsee it, because that's why I wanted to do the series. So I wanted you at least to go, well, even if at the end is still eternal conscious torment, you're going, but now I see where that other side comes from. And then the other thing is, how does, and again, this kind of goes back to that, how does the new creation fit into your theology? If there's no more pain, no more sorrow, how can hell exist eternally afterwards? If all evil is done away with, then how can evil people still exist? And of course, the annihilationists would simply say it doesn't. Okay? They don't. And eternal conscious torment would simply say that the new creation is for the believers only, and the rest are either tormented forever or they're just forgotten about in their torment. So that would be the general idea. So real quick, and then so the important passages to remember is one, Isaiah 66:24, which shows that concept of, is where we first see the idea of worms that don't die, people looking on them with contempt, and their dead bodies, right? So it seems to be Hebrew figurative language for the worm that never dies on the battlefield. Well, of course, those worms die eventually, but this picture, right? So Isaiah 66:24 is really important in your view. Also, you need to figure out what you believe about Luke 16, okay, which is the rich man and Lazarus. You have to figure out that in order to figure out your view of hell.
Does this green match what you're talking about?
No, this one's Revelation 14.
I was just trying to
follow. Yeah, no, like I said, I was lazy this week. So appreciate it. Thanks. Sorry. Luke 16, the rich man and Lazarus. Is it a parable? Is it a real story? But here's the thing. Even if it's a real story, it still says he woke up in Hades, which is discussed as the intermittent state that everyone goes to before the final judgment. So even if that's true, it would just mean that in the state of death before the lake of fire there is torment, but at the end you're destroyed. So even that isn't really a strong case for eternal conscious torment, is it? Like, going with it, can we just be honest? It's not a really strong case. The strongest cases for eternal conscious torment is going to be found in Revelation. And that's going to be Revelation 14 and in Revelation 20. If I can find Revelation 20 here before I discuss Revelation 14. This is the problem when you... There it is. Okay. So let's do Revelation 14 again. If you read it plainly, if we can use the term literally with a little bit of a wink. If anyone... And by the way, I have no problem with people using literal, but it's just a lot of people don't understand what literally means. And that's not always everyone's fault. That's sometimes it's bad teaching, right? Let's just be honest, okay? It's not like you're dumb if that's what you believe. It's just not always the best teaching. All right, Revelation 14. If anyone worships the beast, I haven't changed that. If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also shall drink the wine of God's wrath, poured unmixed into the cup of his anger. He shall be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. So, if you read that straightforwardly with eternal conscious torment in mind, you're going to walk away with God pours out his anger, they're tormented with fire forever and ever, because the smoke of their torment goes up and they have no rest day or night, so they're continually in torture. Last time we met, I showed that this is actually Hebrew parallelism, which is actually really interesting. And how many of you guys were confused when I talked about parallelisms last time? Allison, you're giving me a look like, yeah. All right, so simple. Let me just try to make sure I explain this a little bit easier, because I don't think I rewatched my lesson earlier today, and I don't think I did a good job. So a parallelism, there's a couple different ones. Remember, there's ones that can compare two concepts side by side. We're pretty familiar with those. Those are in the book of Psalms, right? You know, I was in anguish, but I looked up and found my hope in the Lord. You know, there's also like Psalm 91:5, is that the one with the I was born in iniquity? Is that the one? Psalm 95:1, 9.
No, 51.
Psalm 51:5.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he is going like, hey, he's paralleling it with himself with the sin of Bathsheba. It's like, hey, I was born in iniquity and in sin my mother conceived me. So he's like, I was conceived here, born here. So there's a parallel of when he's conceived versus when he's born. So you're seeing like these parallels, right? There's also what we call introverted parallels. Okay, are you following the parallels? You're giving me a look, Allison. I got to make sure you're with me. So, what?
And extroverted ones.
Ambient ones?
Yes. Say that.
No.
So it's a joke.
Just kidding. So an introverted parallelism is actually not as complicated as it sounds. The reason why I have it set up this way is because if you read it, normally it just looks like this. But an introverted parallelism is going to take the very first sentence is going to parallel and pair with the last sentence. Okay? So then the second sentence parallels with the second to the last sentence. And then the third parallels with the beginning of the three. So it does this. 1, so what is it, 6? 1, 6, 2, 5, 3, 4. Okay, so they reflect like this. So the whole point is that it builds the thought like this, one this way, and then it goes out. And it's a poetic thing that in Hebrew poetry that happens. So in other words, if you're reading this, this is actually supposed to parallel and pair with this. Okay, so the idea is if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, these worshipers of the beast and its image and whoever receives the mark of his name. You guys see how that actually sounds like a full sentence? Or right here, he also shall drink the wine of God's wrath, poured unmixed into the cup of his anger, and they have no rest day or night. See how that finishes a thought? That's what they're doing. They parallel concepts, and then it's part of their poetry. For us, we think rhyme, rhythm. For them, they think paralleling concepts within concepts. And it's actually what makes Hebrew very deep, which is actually what makes it impressive that whoever wrote John did this in Greek. But he's clearly a Hebrew writer, because he's also very familiar with the book of Daniel you had mentioned earlier, Cal, because he parallels so many of those things. So it's clearly a Hebrew writer writing in Greek. So then you have, he shall be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. parallels with, and the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. So we have these two, so they build down and then they build back out. And the whole point of this is saying that at the judgment, we are tormented with fire before being burned up and cast into the lake of fire. Because this is Revelation 14. Okay, we got a ways to go before the lake of fire is introduced into the narrative, right? So then you get into Revelation 20, verse 10, and it says, and the devil, who had deceived them, was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and false prophet were, and they were tormented day and night forever and ever. So the most you have in Revelation 20 is that these people are tormented forever. We don't necessarily see everyone else is tormented forever and ever. Okay? It says the beast in its image. Now,
Question.
answer.
How do you then fit that with your 21:4 comment?
So that is actually why you're getting ahead. So the verse 20:10, I still don't think that is saying that they would burn forever and ever, and like torment forever and ever, because we're still seeing that same language that is also used in the Old Testament continually. The fire that burns forever, well, it consumes. So, and an annihilationist will rightfully, I think, point out that, okay, so you have plethora of verses that talk about destruction or parallels with verses of destruction in the Old Testament. And then you have one verse that can kind of possibly hint to it if you look at it from that angle. But then, which one do you take if you're going to go by data? Well, if I go by data, I'm going to go by the majority and then realize that there's probably one here that is the most problematic. Kind of like even Psalm 51:5, like, right? Like, that's the one verse. Everything else seems to indicate that children are very innocent. But this one says he was, conceived in iniquity. Okay, what does that mean? There's like 16 different ways you look at that. So right here, but the CI persons, I'll read, see that John sees a vision where the three beings are thrown into the lake of fire to be tormented forever and ever, but the vision itself symbolizes the destruction of the things and the images that they represent in real life. Because think about it, the beast isn't a real beast. It's not 10 heads, right? The false prophet is kind of an idea. Even the beast, it says the beast, and the mark of the beast is 666. I don't know if you guys know this, but some of the like Greek letters represent letters. The numbers represent letters. Are you guys familiar with that? I don't know if you know this, but 666 is actually numeric for Nero, the Roman emperor at the time who was killing Christians. So he was talking about the beast of its image. Who? Nero. Taking the ideology of the world and putting it, that's why it's on the forehead. It's a symbol of thought, of in your mind. So all of this, so it's probably when people take Revelation way too literally, and then you get into the weird Left Behind books, because there's so much symbolism. So, and that's why I'm saying, like, careful not to build your entire doctrine on probably one of the most symbolic books in the Bible. Okay, there's clearly imagery, and I think this is an imagery of the beast, the false prophet, which is of course a false teacher, the beast who is the evil powers of this world, and then you have the, what's the other one? I'm missing it. Satan. Yeah, Satan, who's of course the deceiver, a picture of all of them being cast in the lake of fire and destroyed. Because the beast is really an ideology. Ideologies aren't tortured forever, but it's the person whom these things, the people whom this would represent, if that makes sense. Am I making sense on that? A study of Revelation is probably a whole other kedar to do in here, because that gets really, really interesting, but I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of studying Revelation. Because there's once I've read a 4 views book, and at the end of all 4 of them I went, they all make a really good case. It's just really hard to be certain because John's on the greatest acid trip of all time. Jokes.
So, what did you say you were, at this point, you are a...
I believe in as far as
annihilation.
I believe in annihilation, yes.
In the Old Testament, and maybe I'm missing stuff, but in the Old Testament, Sodom and Gomorrah, they didn't go anywhere. They just was destroyed. Mm-hmm. And even the wife who turned to salt. As far as I know, that means nothing left of her.
Right.
She didn't go nowhere else. Okay, so anyway.
I'd agree with, yeah. And that's the same, it uses that language too. It's like in the smoke of Sodom and Gomorrah and the fire and smoke of Sodom and Gomorrah rise up forever and ever.
But we don't see it.
Right, so it seems like more of a symbol.
A long-lasting destruction.
Permanent.
Yeah, permanent, exactly. It'd be just a symbol of, kind of like, if you're a football fan and it's like the game ends at 42-0, you're like, we murdered them. You didn't literally murder them, but it's a picture of defeat, right? So, yeah,
All right.
I agree.
I just wanted to make sure I was following.
No, you're not wrong at all. So anyway, has this series been interesting, at least helpful to maybe, and can you see at least, even if you're still believing eternal conscious torment, how at the end of it you go, that's a really good argument here for apologetics, right? Well, I don't understand how God could torture someone forever and ever. Cool. Even though you might believe it, you can go, not all Christians believe that, and let me explain why. And then you can help them go, okay, well, maybe that there is a possibility that God actually is more merciful than I originally thought. Now, and some people are like, well, you're watering down the truth. No, the fact is that there's a broad understanding within Orthodox Christian history, and it's important for you to understand those things so you can properly defend the faith from every angle you can. One of the biggest problems in our churches today is that our defense of our beliefs is usually only narrow to our one particular doctrinal statement. And then if somebody has a really good objection toward it and they can't get around it, and all you do is stick to your own doctrinal statement, you're probably going to struggle with that. So, does that make sense? Okay, I want to make sure we're good there.
Well, then it makes me think too, you and I have had the conversation of like major on the majors, minor on the minors, and while hell is probably closer to major than minor, this idea is still something that, okay, if we disagree on, whether it's eternal conscious torment or annihilation, we still believe that,
Bad place.
bad place, bad result if you don't
Right.
if you don't believe Christ died and saved you.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it'd still be a better place that it's like, okay, if someone doesn't believe and you share those perspectives, and it's like you may come to a conclusion that I don't agree with, this is the bad place, this is what happens in the end if you don't believe, but that leads you to the ultimate conclusion is you believe,
So you don't go to bad place.
yeah.
It's just like,
And
it's kind of like,
we can be united in that, right?
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
unity, not conformity.
Right, exactly. And that's why the other thing is, like, it's kind of like that question of, if somebody was a Christian for 25, 30 years and suddenly stopped being a Christian, were they ever saved to begin with? Are they still saved now? Did they lose their salvation? Well, debates fire on all cylinders on that conversation, and they all make some good points, right? But the reality is, either way, not saved need salvation in the gospel, right? That the solution's still the same, whether or not they were never saved, whether they lost salvation, the same methodology applies. Go give them the gospel. So, and that's actually something I think that'd be a fun conversation to have sometime, is discussing what we call a once saved, always saved versus, oh my gosh, what is it? Conditional security? Yeah, conditional security. I think that'd be a fun thing to explore in here at some point. I was raised staunch once saved, always saved. Like like in a way that's beyond what the GGF teaches. Like in a way that's like absurdity. Like, you said the sinner's prayer when you're 5 years old, saved forever, and it's like, so what you would try to do, what these evangelist meetings would do, you're raised in the same crowd, they would just preach hellfire and brimstone. All right, repeat this prayer after me at the end of it, and if you repeated that prayer, raise your hand. All right, cool, you're saved.
200 kids saved.
Yeah, we had 200 kids saved last weekend. It's like, was there heart in it? Did they really trust Jesus? Or did they just say some words because some dude told them to, and now they're like, okay, peace, I said the secret code, now I'm saved. It's like, and some people, that's what.
Breaking news. More people saved than there are people.
Pretty much. So it's just this. So, and now I believe in conditional security. So I believe salvation, you're saved forever as long as you believe, and that you can reject it. But not everyone agrees with me on that. But it'd be a fun thing to explore, because there's actually I want to get with Drew McLeod, because I think he's got a stronger argument than most people make on it.
Yeah.
Well-
That parallels well with what you're saying with hell too, is as for the Christian, it really doesn't matter, because if you're actually being a Christian your whole life, then the doctrine of hell doesn't matter and the doctrine of eternal security doesn't matter.
Also, like, what's the difference between saying well, you were saved compared to, well, you're never saved at all.
Right. The whole point is you're not
going to
saved.
heaven. Yeah, you're not going to heaven. Yeah.
So that's what's funny is that church denominations have straight up split over that topic, and they hate each other on that topic. I'm like, and I find that always kind of silly because I'm like, okay, either way, the result is the same. So anyway,
And as a result of your decision, there's probably one.
Yeah, it's that question is all about hypotheticals, right?
Right.
Well, if you were to die today,
right? Yeah, exactly. So now so we're gonna do that book. For those of you, if you guys want to buy your own copy, I'll go to the beginning. That's the book. We're going to go through it. We're going to start not next week because we have no class next week, but the week after. And that'll be us literally, we'll sit in a circle in here. We'll talk about it. I'm underlining things. I'm making notes in my own copy. I was originally going to do a whole PowerPoint presentation, all sorts of stuff, but my life hasn't allowed me to do. Most of the time when I'm doing these sorts of series, I'm taking books and parts and then I'm putting it into notes and then I try to make it into a presentation. It's hours and hours of work. And it's just like, you know what? Maybe this time I'd rather you guys have your hands on it and look at it yourself because it's a very important topic. I think it's probably more important than any topic we've studied so far, besides maybe arguments for God. So, cool. Right, y'all dismiss or you can hang out, doesn't matter.